Quindi se qualcuno ha bisogno di spiegazioni, vuole fare domande alle persone che sono intervenute questa mattina, abbiamo tempo.
I have not thought enough how to formulate my question, but there is a question that you're bothered by in Vienna at the moment, but which I also relates to some of the projects presented here or discussed yesterday. So how, if we think of our museums as a sort of a framework, a context for work of art, and how we use the question of what does a work of art do in our context. I think we think a lot about that. It's one thing if we invite certain artists, which we know their work relates to our contents or to the content of an exhibition, as Anita has shown. So that fits in it's a sort of a curatorial choice why you invite somebody, or you include a certain work of art in an exhibition. And then you have the other situation where you have an artist, maybe a resident or through some other project, who kind of interacts with the collection or whatever and has its own project. But this project then, it deals with the content of the museum in a way you would never do, or you think it doesn't conform to your ethical standards or what you want to convey to the public, or how you would use your objects or contents. So I remember the example that Bambi told us yesterday with the anthropometric photographs, and also the work presented now with this bullying at schools and putting that aside to a men's house, which a men's house is an assembling space. Why do we associate it with violence in schools? What does it tell us? These kind of things. So how do we deal with artistic freedom, within our context? So just to give you an example, we have a project now ongoing in Vienna, and there are many open questions for us, because there is an artist who has the plan to use parts of our collection that we might not exhibit. She wants to use anthropometric photographs, she wants to use exoticizing sculptures, or sculptures she thinks might convey an image of exoticizing people, or how do you call it, Schrumpfkopf in English?
Shrunken heads.
Shrunken heads, human remains, and she wants to create an artwork that she wants to provocate, but it's not clear yet what she's going to do. And so already when we received the list of objects she's looking in our she's looking for in our collection, there was a little strange feelings between the curators of what she's going to do, and what will that do if this work of art is exhibited in our museum, and what is our role as sort of either collaborating, or what is our role as curators? Do we just give access to these objects and then it's not of our concern? So all these questions came up to me looking at all the projects, and I would be interested to hear from the colleagues and maybe also the artists of how they see this sort of maybe sometimes conflictual relationship between a museum, an institution, a work of art, and anthropological position as curators, ethical issues involved. Yes.
Qualcuno vuole rispondere? Perché questa è esattamente la sfida chi ci pone questo progetto. Noi non abbiamo avuto nessun tipo di esperienza in questo campo in precedenza e il lavoro con l'IM si pone proprio in questa prospettiva, come ha sottolineato anche la collega di Cambridge o qualcuno. Comunque il lavoro con l'artista è un work in progress, quindi noi non abbiamo questo tipo di esperienza ancora e vogliamo appunto vedere cosa esce fuori dal lavoro con l'IM, dal lavoro con gli architetti, con gli scenografi. Non so se qualcun altro invece può avere già avuto questo tipo di esperienza e può rispondere a Barbara in maniera più esauriente.
We've got some problem about the ethics with showing the bullyism and showing kids that fighting each other, punching in the face and other stuff. And it was a moral problem also, because the biggest part of the audience of the museum is kids. So how could be the message? But at the same time, we're talking about that it was, if it's on YouTube, you cannot hide anymore. For example, about the idea of ethics. And the problem of putting with the House of the Man, it was also a problem that the artists already created, the pieces already created the video. And the artists came to Rome for a first visit, and we decided together which was the best solution and the best I'm gonna say fix and relation with the video. So in that case, it's not talking about with the collection. The problem is not to open the collection because it is something that is already displayed in the museum, but it's find a new meanings, and that could be problematic also with working with some very sensitive audience and sensitive problems. But I think that it was a really good point. We reached a really good point because we opened a sort of close narrative that was in that area. That it's like historical and narrative that brings everything in the same way, that present everything in the same way. And maybe if it was only for 3 weeks, we try to create an interference. We try to break a little bit the meaning that that kind of collection and that kind of narrative explain every day, day by day during the years. I don't know if I answered properly.
Yes, but what was, I mean, the content of the video, the violence shown in association with the men's house? I don't understand the message. What was the message of the artist? What was he going to show us? What is he telling us with this? Or what was his aim? What did he want to tell?
So the message was to put together, but not in a temporal line, two systems of how can I say, learning, to kind of different idea of school, to kind of different idea of violence without mediation and with mediation, and create a sort of link in which there is no temporality. But it's about the idea also, which I quoted the R. Snyder, the idea of relinquishment. So the idea that the contemporary artist came here and he know exactly that it cannot go further, it cannot go deep inside the collection. He could understand some point, he could highlight some aspect, but it's not from his background, especially when it's not like indigenous or native artist. And at the same time there is the collection. And also the collection decided to lose one part of his meaning, and recycling and creating a new dialogical approach that maybe could not explain exactly what's the meaning of violence and what's the link clear between the House of the Man and the video posted on YouTube and the violence in the school, but at the same time open a dialogue, because that was the problem, that most of the exhibition talks about the same issue, even if we get a contemporary aspect, they not really open some problem. And I think that it's also good to open a problem and don't give any kind of answer, just to open. Maybe it's not a good answer at all.
Which problem are you talking about? The problem of the men's house or the problem of these fighting kids?
Yeah, I think that was my question as well, and it's a larger question, which I think everyone has been asking over these past 2 days about where is the curatorial voice in the Ethnographic Museum, and there is a curatorial voice with it for this YouTube project, but what about the relationship to the man's house, and what is the meaning of the man's house, and is this a response to the object? And men's houses have different meanings in different spaces, and I guess I'm thinking of a men's lodge in Native America where it's a religious space and it has absolutely nothing to do with violence.
Yeah.
But so that's a response to this issue. I had a couple of thoughts about this conference, and I wanted to mention, not directly related, but there were some sort of common threads over the past 2 days that I found very interesting, and one of them had to do with the idea of possession. And I guess for me, as a former curator, but someone who works now in the academy, I'm wondering about the meaning of the Ethnographic Museum and how it's shifting. And this idea of possession came up, and this idea of possession came up in some of the artworks. We saw it with Sarah Bennett and the tension in possession and sort of trying to hold on to someone's personal possessions and these mysterious objects. We just saw it with the Cambridge project with these Pacific objects and the pictures of the hands and trying to understand objects through holding them, or the frame of interpretation had to do with the hands. And then I was thinking about possession yesterday, where there were 3 presentations that had to do with giving voice to people who were dispossessed, so the idea of dispossession, and people who were either in mental hospitals or who were migrants who were given a voice in the Maxi in a contemporary museum setting. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the idea of possession is very key to the idea of museums in general, historically, and we're still sort of playing with the idea of possession. But my question also has to do with the idea of our role as ethnographers too, and if we are relinquishing, to use the term that you mentioned, our hold, if you will, our possession on colonial objects, is our new other the dispossessed. And so I'm curious about what we're doing, who we're working with, what we're working with, and also not only that, but who is working with these communities, our curators or our educators. And so this whole idea of the shifting role of the museum and all of these ideas. And finally, these are scattered thoughts, but I found this conference really, really interesting. And I was also struck by the Mozambique artist who was recycling things in the garbage dump, in the junkyard. And I found there was a connection between the garbage dump and perhaps the museum, both as heterotopic places, liminal places that are open to redefinition. And I just wanted to end this sort of ramble of thoughts with the example that Arne Schneider gave yesterday about the chemist
who created this sense of fear. And I wish he were here because I wanted to ask him, he was talking about native people who fish for their livelihood, but they are now going into garbage dumps as well. And I was wondering about that artist, and if she did an exhibition, what would that sense of smell be? Would it be a sense of garbage or a sense of food, and whose perspective would be represented in such an exhibition? So I hope some of this is making sense. Anyway, thank you.
Just quickly, I think that Barbara's question still remains central, because the question is, what different work does an ethnographic museum oh, should I go to the front? Yeah, sorry. What different work does an ethnographic museum, what does it do differently than an art museum? I think that is a central question when art is in it. Because I remember, for two reasons. One, I remember an artist being invited to work with us at the Tropical Museum, and it was still only the Tropical Museum. And when I saw the work in a kind of white cube space, it looked like portraits. When I saw the work in the Tropical Museum, it looked like physical anthropology. It's because the Tropical Museum added another level of history, another level of investment in physical anthropology, which made it different. So when the Rijksmuseum took it, and I saw it, I still disliked it, but notwithstanding, our building, our history offers another layer. So the question, therefore, is what does it mean when art comes in, and what different kind of labor is being done, both ethically as well as practically, with these objects? So I think that that's still an urgent question. One of the things I think I think that we as ethnographic museums, we're in a, perhaps what I've learned from all of this is perhaps we should stop asking the question about whether art or not. Because the fact is that we've been doing it for so long now that it is, we use art. So perhaps art share suggests that it is the common, that confluence of a theoretical space, a set of questioning that we want to ask, which art offers as well as ethnography offers, to try and think through the present. That's what I kind of come out with. But I want to go back to that thing of ethics. Because in terms of the ethics, you spoke about the boxing and so forth. We invited an artist recently, and you want to be able to invite any artist. It is true. And when we put the exhibition on, one of the things that happened was that there was a question as to whether the artists, one could call it naivety, did not just reinscribe the same kind of historical violence as we used to do as an ethnographic museum. So whether or not the narrative that he was trying to create by encountering and engaging with the museum did not just reproduce stereotypes. And therefore, it is probably so that you would want to engage with any artist. But the question is if every artist is going to necessarily be able to do the work that you want to do as an institution, especially in the kinds of contested regime in which we work, which is one where some people are more citizens than others, where racialization is still a problem, where homophobia still exists. And so how do you choose as an institution? Because I can tell you that one of the things that I found interesting recently was to try and work with an artist who, if I were to be incautious, and forgive me for being rude, it wasn't an artist but a poet. And in my initial discussion with her, I thought, oops, what have I done? Okay, I've already invited her, and now when I saw what she was trying to discuss and what she was trying to do, I was saying, should I have done this? It eventually turned out to be a beautiful project because of the engagement over 2.5 months, she and I talking it through and talking through the sensitivities and all of that. It became an excellent project. But in the beginning, I can tell you that I was worried that what was going to be produced was a reinscription of exoticization. And that, for me, is that caution. So I would trouble Arne Schneider's comment about relinquishment and appropriation by asking the question, within the kinds of regimes of power that we still inhabit, who has the possibility to relinquish and who doesn't? Who has the possibility to appropriate and who doesn't? And whether or not the people who can appropriate are not still, by relinquishing ownership and possession, are not still those people who have historically been powerful or today have moved into regimes of power because they probably operate within a system of the art world, where they also have become the cultural or artistic elite. Because for me, many of the quote-unquote source indigenous, however we call them, communities, are still struggling with the fact of property and ownership. And so we have to meander that terrain very tentatively, realizing that we still exist in a system of inequality when it comes to these kinds of work that we do in museums. So just to conclude, I think that our museum has a box that is not a white cube. It's a cube with another kind of color.
But Wayne, so what is your suggestion? What is our role as curators and as safekeepers of that heritage? Are we in collaboration with artists? Is our role the role of an archivist that gives access to the materials we house? Or is our role an active role in the creative process? Could it be?
Well, so at our museum we have, which is funny, we have 14 Laura curators or 15, and two of them are contemporary art curators. So you know, we have contemporary art curators in the Ethnographic Museum, and people keep asking me, why art, why art? I remember being with an artist who said he would never want to be in our museum. It was terrible because he was sitting in the museum at the time when he said it. So never want to be there. But my answer to your question is that for me as a museum, we are involved in a process of thinking through a set of problematics, thinking through a set of questions. And that's what for me an exhibition does. It is a process of thinking through certain questions and finding possible answers to them, not answers, but interrogation, thinking through. And so it is an active role that a curator plays. We are there, exactly. It's that role of care, but actively questioning and battling and fighting with the artist as we try to negotiate, which, to be honest with you, I would suggest we play that same role with objects. Because I think it was your point where you mentioned the fact that some artists do not want to be boxed. I would suggest to you that it is us who have boxed some objects in, not artists, but even the objects we box them in. We say that they're this and they're that and they're whatever. So it is that active role of an ethical project, which is always about practice and activity, rather than a passive role of the artist coming in and sitting. Because to be honest with you, when I put the artist there and say, artist, you go ahead, at the end of the day, even if we think he or she is going to go away with it, it is the museum that remains the one with the shame of having done this. So it is active. It is, yeah, I think so anyway. Can I? Should I? Sorry.
I think this is my point of view. We forget that the times go, we still have to go on for I don't know how many years, million years, who knows. We are all antique this moment. Don't think that we are the future. Actually, the moment what we are saying is already past. And we still have to go on, you see. It's just like what you said about curator or an artist. 100 years ago, or even 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, there's no curator. But we adapted this kind of system to go into. And all of us are growing. We don't know which is right. We don't know which is wrong. But we are living in this moment. And we're going to present this moment. And this moment is old, it's antique. Because 100 years later, they will say, I don't know where they're going to put us into you know, they have created a museum for us. So I think what we are doing is interesting. And of course, the discussion makes us grow. And we must not have a conflict between artist and curator, because we are doing the same thing. I have a feeling that now the curator is an artist. This is a problem, because they impose the artists to do what they want to do. And my idea of art is not that I'm going to change the world or whatever. I just want to understand and who am I, you know, in this moment, and to live in it, no? And then of course, and the curator is a very important part that usually artists, we can't express ourselves well, what we want to say. And this become a collaboration between a curator and an artist. And we did the same thing. And so what we are doing, I think is not important which is right, which is wrong. It's important that we are doing it, you know. So this is my idea of what we are today.
I think these 2 days have been very inspiring and vibrant, but I think what we really need in the near future is to develop a more focused dialogue, discussion and museological studies about the public of this kind of experiment. Because very few of us often talks about the reaction of the public. We are discussing about curatorial point of view, but very often we forget the public. And for instance, I was very curious about the experiment of Lim at the Museum Manzù, and I want to ask you, what about the chairs? How many visitors sat in your chairs? Because usually visitors are used not to touch works of art, and they were few or many. And I want to ask you if any visitor moved the chair from your point of view to his or her point of view.
I think they must have quite some visitors, because every day I heard some complaining from the workers in the museum. They say they moved the chair. So it means someone has sitting on it. So, but the chair which I make through my point of view, the visitor have been sitting and looking at the sculpture is not, yes, the public is very important, but my idea is I don't want to invade the masterpiece. Since I've been called to be a protagonist in that moment, but I still think that what museum have, the things I have to understand, not to, you know, not to go over, but just to be a secondary and make the piece of art which museum already had. This is about Manzù actually, the masterpiece of Manzù. So my main idea is that, my point of view. And then when the public they participate, of course it makes me very joyful, because that is also another part of the main part of my what you call my interest. And I only think that the public sometimes is so important that we can understand only with the lake of St. Peter. I don't know if anyone touched the lake of St. Peter. there's a bronze, you know, and now it's all completely confused. So you see, this participation, it's something deep. I think it's hard, no? So of course that is also part of my idea, which seeing the public, which concern about, no, the participation of the public is very important, because it's hard. It's not understanding or necessary to understand, but it's to get in. This is the main idea that what we are doing now here. Is the main idea is the public come into this museum. The problem is they don't come anymore. So it must have some misunderstanding of communication, you know. So this is what we are here to try to understand. What is the, no? How are we going to participate, to collaborate together?
I just wanted to add something to the question of artistic freedom, because I think often it's not a question of artistic freedom, whether some things can happen or not, but what Wayne said, that it's a question of communication and giving the artist the information to know what has already happened in a museum, and to be together with the artist in a process. So I think it's not always a restriction to artistic freedom to tell an artist that, for example, you don't use certain objects in a museum, or that also you don't want to show something or show other things, and then in the end the artist can decide whether he wants to break with these conventions, or whether he perhaps just didn't know that certain things are what happened before in the museum. So yeah, I think it's the question of artistic freedom is that after an artist has all the information he needs about the space, then he can decide what he wants to make. But often beforehand they are just lacking some information. So I basically agree with the dialogue.
French? You want I try to speak English too now, I can. There is a lot of questions, the relationship between curators and ethnologists. And I think the last example we saw and we heard, and another before, make rupture in our practices. And that's for me, and the last example, he began to say that he wants to go out with this consideration of coloniser et décoloniser, to find directly the violence, and he put the violence in the center of the proposal. And so that's in rupture with our way of working. And I think that we can find more systems to change our way of making exhibition. A propos, a scientific proposition, then a scenography, then and then and then. Even the same way to do the thing. And for my side, I am thinking about how to find system models at the light of the practice, the best practices we have now, to impact more our institution in the way to work. I'm not sure if I'm clear, but we can find a lot of good examples of artists working in museum. And everybody can say, this one is very interesting, this other is very interesting, this is not so sexy. But what we are looking for is to change our way or making exhibition, and the public is the first preoccupation we have. It's in our gene. How to say that? Dans nos gènes. Teens? Jeans?
Jeans.
Thank you very much. No, that's not the question. It's why, is exactly why we are working, you know? And when the public arrive at the end of a discussion, for me some things to... On tourne en rond?
That's, I don't know, Joker.
So, that's only for public. It's very important, but it's the center of all we are doing. And the most important is with art, ethnology, scenography, and I think Benoit Dutoit will speak a little about it here, to constitute teams to work, to find a digital question, and so to find new way. And I will be very happy if at the end of the 4 years we will work together. We can write things about models. Models not as a thing that everybody has to do, everyone has to do, but how to change our way with the best examples we can rassembler. Yeah. Sorry for my English.
Just an answer to the question of public. I work for public, I'm a museologist and I make exhibition for public, but I think that the work with the artist in residence in the museum, it's another question, the question to show something to the public. For me, I think that when we work in a museum with an artist about with a collection, with a scientist and a collection with an artist, to recreation something, to think about something else, it's not only for the public. It's first for I think for the museum and for the collection. I think after you can show the work and discuss the work for the public. For me, in our work in museum, I think is the first step is the work in a museum with the collection and the artist, and after to sing, to show that to the public. That's because I use the work in progress, because it's not only necessary to show the result to the public, I think. I don't know, but I think it's important not...
Dico anch'io una cosa. Io mi chiedo e vi chiedo se tutto questo nostro discorso serve per dare una risposta alla crisi dell'autorità etnografica, così come è stata posta dall'antropologia della fine del Novecento, ovvero se è un tentativo di rendere il museo contemporaneo. Io credo che il dilemma sia questo, cioè è un problema di crisi dell'autorità etnografica del curatore, che quindi deve dare voce ad altri per riuscire a rappresentare meglio le culture, oppure è un'istanza che il curatore pone di essere fino in fondo contemporaneo. Credo che sia questa per me la questione.
I can only speak about our own museums, but I find it very hard to imagine that we would be exceptional in this regard. But it is often suggested that introducing contemporary art in a former colonial museum like ours, which is partly an ethnographic museum, is something new. Whereas in actual fact, there was contemporary art in that museum right from the start. I mean, it's in the architecture, but for instance, during the first exhibitions, there were Art Nouveau works of art which were created specifically for the museum. I talked about golden statues. These were works of art as well. And what is so striking is precisely
that as time went on, it's precisely the works of art which proved to be the most controversial, not the ethnographic objects as such. The controversy relating to the ethnographic objects has got to do with the way in which they entered the museum. But the objects that are now considered most problematic are those that were created as works of art in relation to the colonial endeavor, to colonial representations of the former colonized, and so on and so forth. I think that we have to take this kind of history into consideration precisely to try not to fall into the traps that we obviously fell into. And then, as I said, when you get to a situation like in our museum, that these mobile objects actually become immutable because they are considered part of the heritage and of the architecture. And you cannot remove them from the museum anymore, that you can tear down the architecture of the place. So I think we have to be very careful indeed when we engage with artists, because yes, we are living in the here and now, but we must be aware of the fact that that works of art which are not considered controversial now may very well become controversial in 10 or 20 years' time. And then that we will be stuck with it in much the same way that we are stuck with certain objects which we now consider very problematic and which we dearly would love to get rid of, but unfortunately we cannot. And then I also wonder, this whole idea of the freedom of the artist, that can in itself become a kind of a colonizing practice indeed, when you just simply let artists loose in your collections and you can tell them, well, you do whatever you want. That pretty much reminds me of what happened in the Congo Far West, so to speak, where all these colonizers came in and did exactly what they wanted. And we all know the consequences about that. So I think that indeed, as curators, we have to assume our responsibilities and are very actively involved, knowing that former curators were equally involved and thinking that they were taking their responsibility when they were commissioning the kind of works of art that we are still stuck with in our museum. So it's a very important question, and there's no easy answer.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on the point that Bambi was making also, but I don't know your name from Turkey also. And I wanted to question, I think the same as Bambi was doing, whether it's really the case that it's not the public that we're trying to reach. Because I could actually say, especially from the examples you were giving and what you want to do in your permanent exhibit for Tervuren, is absolutely trying to make sure that these works of art, the contemporary works of art that you're going to be presenting there, will question the once contemporary works of art which were put into your museum, by questioning how many people have suffered the consequences of the Belgian colonial past. So in that sense, I actually think that we are past the idea that this contemporary art is just at the margins of our contemporary ethnographic museums practice. It shouldn't be, and it should actually have a big engagement with our publics, but only if it's curated and selected very, specifically to engage with certain imageries, representations, presentations that we've been presenting, and not willing, or because you would be able to, if you want to, Bambi, you could actually take out those statues if you would want to, right? I mean, if you would be able to convince the Belgian government of the fact that these are statues you don't want to show anymore. So the ideas that you're doing now is actually making sure that you engage with those objects so that they don't keep on portraying the same images as they always have without being contested. Am I right in assuming that? So
in our case, for example, 15 years ago, Stephen actually started his project with Opie. I don't know, Wayne, are you still presenting? And other people, is there still more presentations of the partners, or is this... Vito, is there more presentations of partners?
No,
or is
it's
it...
just a discussion.
Okay. Because we've done these kind of projects for like 15 or 20 years now at least, engaging with contemporary artists many times at the marches and kind of like questioning our practices. But I think that we hope, at least in the Netherlands, that we are moving beyond just a questioning, but actually integrating it into our practices and making sure that it actually does reach our publics, and not just questioning, but being in a relationship with artists, and making sure that some of the things that art can do, which is problematizing things, will actually be possible also in ethnographic museums. So, you know, the whole idea of this boxing, moving beyond just one or the other box, but integrating them and making them into relational elements within the museum.
Yes, I would like to come back to the question of the public. Yes, because I think you're right. It's a process that is important for the inside of the museum, but also for the outside. So my question is, for instance, in your example, I'm sure you had, did you have programs for visitors with the artist, or how did you communicate the message of the exhibition, of the intervention, and what was the reaction, what was your experience with the public in this respect?
For exhibition Come the Forest, we organized 3 or 4 visits with the public and the artist, and discussion about the work, a discussion about the collection, and it's very, very important. But the link between the artist and the public is very important. But during the exhibition, the public, it's not easy for the public to understand what's happened with the residences. We made a making of to explain the whole process to the public, but and that's a good idea, I think, for the public, because it's not easy. But for the whole public, majority of the public, that's an exhibition about photograph, Congolese photograph, and the process is not direct understanding. For us, it's not a problem, you know, because it's not. But yes, of course, it's important to show the pieces, the results to the public, but not as a residency. Maybe as a question about museum. And for the second residency, the work from Ivia Izamba, it's just fresh. Then we don't show yes, we show the results, but not as an exhibition, as an installation in a Beaux-Arts, Fine Art Museum in Brussels. And public like that, because maybe it's more direct and more easy to understand. It's easier to understand the practice and the reflection of the artist. But I think it's not a good question to opposite the work and the public. But it's not. I think the process is not for the public. That's my reflection.
I didn't agree with you.
Yeah, I understand.
But I want to speak about artists. We say herself that the process is the most important.
Of course.
Yeah, so why don't you want to show the process? It's not an obligation. but it could be directing the work of the artist. And how to say the project we have with the artist. If the project of the artist, discussion with you, is to be for the public, he has to be. If he has to be intern of the museum for a reason you choose with the artist, it could be good. But no, but it depends on the project.
I have a feeling that we have to go and eat, right? Okay, anyway, I just want to say that if there's a film of Antonioni and if there's another film of Rambo, if we are going to concentrate on the public, we might get some problem. Because film the Antonioni, maybe they have less public, but when it's come to long term, they create the public. Some things we need times. Something we need instantly, immediately. We want that immediately, which is, of course, we cannot compete with the film of Rambo or whatever, Sex in the City. In this sector, I think we need time. We need time, no? Right?
Grazie a tutti di essere venuti.